If you're going to acquire personnel, whether those be coaches, players, or even in the front office, hey, you might as well go to the best. Go to Alabama, at least Nick Saban's Alabama. And that's what Ohio State has done once again for a fourth time this offseason. So much going on around college football. We will, of course, take your comments and questions. And we're here on Buckeyes Live, typically on Wednesday, folks, but that's why you subscribe. Hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Steve and others headed off to the NFL Combine this week, so we will adjust. And here we are on a Monday. There is Steve, Bucknuts 247 Sports, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly, as well as the podcast to lock in on. Guys, how are we doing today?
Doing well.
Doing great.
Thank you for adjusting the schedules to make this happen this week. As mentioned, Ohio State is a new director of player personnel, Sam Petito. He comes from Alabama. So maybe that's all he put on the resume. University of Alabama under Nick Saban. That probably was good enough.
Yeah, looks like another guy to work in the office with Mark Pantoni, who is the general manager / associate athletic director for player personnel. So there's no confusion that Petito is coming in to work for Mark Pantoni. He has been at Alabama with Nick Saban for the last 8 years. Been a pretty good run there, obviously, at Alabama, but certainly with Nick Saban announcing his retirement, there's been a lot of upheaval within that program. I mean, you think about what they did. They had 6 consecutive top 2 recruiting classes with him on the staff there at Alabama. And obviously, they win, they're in the hunt every year for the SEC and the national championship. He was at Georgia before that, North Carolina. I mean, so this guy has been at some major colleges, obviously, and he's going to come in and give Ohio State one more resource in its bid to attract and sign not only the best high school players, but I would have to think that this guy is also somebody who will be involved in assessing talent and making relationships with players in the transfer portal as well. So I guess we'll wait and see how Mark Pantoni aligns the whole situation. But I would consider this a major coup for Ohio State to hire a guy who's been integral to the success at Alabama the last 8 years or so.
Yeah, it's basically hiring another Mark Pantoni, and we know what kind of impact he's had at Ohio State. And I've already seen Devin Sanchez's mom on Twitter talking about how happy she was when she heard the news that Petito was going to Ohio State because that their family loves him. And it's interesting, Steve, talking about the evaluation and the transfer portal aspect of this. Mark Pantoni and Petito, they have touched base with so many high school recruits throughout the years that just about anybody good in the portal will have talked to them previously in high school. So you're building relationships, not just for the guys that you're recruiting, but also for the guys that may be in the portal later on as well. So yeah, it's the families, the players all like him. And so you're bringing that kind of personality in to fill up that director of player personnel. And it's just amazing how much this has all grown because, Mark Pantoni was like, when he first got here in 2012, brought over with Urban Meyer, was just like director of recruiting, the recruiting coordinator or whatever. And that whole department has expanded every single year as the sport has expanded in different ways and social media has taken its course. And now you have the recruiting department, the graphics department, Ohio State, like everybody else, now has a full-time person evaluating film of guys in the portal and things like that. And so this is a big thing. It's a good thing. It's going to help out. And, you get the Georgia, the Alabama background. I believe he's from Louisiana as well. So just that whole tri-state area in there where there's a whole bunch of talent, certainly not going to hurt.
I could use a graphics department. Maybe they could loan me a few people. Steve did a nice job of outlining basically what this position is about. And it's funny because when you put the tag on it from just a few years ago, well, a few years, meaning maybe 7 or 8 at this point, in terms of director of recruiting and how that is morphed because of how much the game has changed. I would have asked you years ago, okay, how do you compare it to an NFL position doing the same thing? Now I would ask, what are the differences? Maybe a salary cap, and that's about it.
Well, and that's going to be like the collective liaison. There's going to be something there as well. So yeah, and you've got Mark Pantoni as the general manager. I mean, the general manager oversees everything. Now, the guy above him would be like the president in the NFL. You've got the team president, and then the general manager. So I think at some point you'll see Mark Pantoni maybe become OSU team president, and then you've got the GM below him and the director of player personnel. But with the collectives, and once that all gets brought in house in terms of the NIL, that's you're gonna need a cap guy. It's going to be, I won't even say a mini NFL. It's just going to be another NFL in terms of the personnel departments, the stuff behind the scenes where you've got money guys, you've got talent evaluator guys. You can't ask one guy to oversee all of that. The NFL has 53 players. College will have double that. So just from walk-ons and everything else, it's a lot to ask. But yeah, the differences are going to become, less and less, and different differences and different sames, where how you evaluate or how you keep guys or how you push guys out. There's a lot of professional aspect to it, but in a different way. So yeah, it'll be interesting to watch how it all comes to pass and the jobs that are created for it and about it. It's college sports are an industry in of themselves, and it's not getting any smaller.
And Tony, the transfer portal portion that I don't hear talked about much or at all, I bring it up. Not that I'm some genius, but I certainly bring it up anytime somebody asks me, hey, transfer portal, and especially the month of December. We talked about just the workload during the month of December. And the thing that I think of with the transfer portal is the scouting of these players. Basically going back to the film room, having to look up all this video. Well, that's done for then, I'm sure, but by assistance. Okay. And having to evaluate all these players, it's easy for us to look at the transfer portal and say, hey, that guy looks good. That guy looked at his stat sheet, whatever, but they're making important decisions. So just having to re-scout all these players that are available just seems like a huge task in and of itself.
Well, and I remember when this first started happening with the portal and how big it became, Mark Pantoni would talk about all of the hours that it takes to review films. Once guys show up, you're like, well, who is this guy? Let's take a look. Now Ohio State has Billy Homer, who is their college scouting director, who basically that's part of his job is just to evaluate. And I wonder how often do you even wait until they're in the portal, because the portal is only open a couple of times a year, so you've got to fill out other times. So you're probably pre-scouting potential guys. You could probably just go ahead and scout everybody that signs with Texas A&M or Miami, because they'll be in the portal at some point. So just get a head start on that, work ahead. But also guys who kind of blow up in the group of 5, they're having a great season. Hey, take a look at this guy, because generally once you have one good season in the group of 5 now and you have a season to go, or 2 seasons in the case of Will Kazmarek went from Ohio to Ohio State. Once you start seeing guys, and you have to be looking for it, but once you start seeing guys at the lower levels have some success, hey, take a look, because there's a pretty good chance they're going to be in the portal, because that's just the way things progress now.
All right. This seems to be a natural segue into what was decided in federal court in both Tennessee and Virginia several days ago concerning NIL. And with all the confusion about what NIL is supposed to be, how it's being regulated, that it's not being regulated, all that, I think one of the basic tenets that we were all fairly comfortable with, and actually was a place of security for the college football fan, thinking, okay, we're maintaining some level, at least the speed limit's still there, that these players can't be induced or lured to a particular team. They're still, at least if we want to believe the best of these situations, they're still making the decision based on football development, where they want to play, winning a championship, going to school. Yeah, they still do that. Go to school and all that. And at least they're not technically supposed to be induced. Now it's like, psh, that's illegal. And so it's blown wide open now.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on this, and I hope that it doesn't come to a point where it leads to the end of college football, I guess, as we know it. Although college football, as we know it, seems like it is on the cusp of some type of huge paradigm shift, and what we know as the FCS ranks is probably soon going to be one rung below even where it's at now, and it'll be the group of five will be where the FCS ranks used to be probably, and maybe the Big Ten or the ACC and the Big 12 will be where the group of five used to be. I don't know. We're getting to an uneasy state here, I think, with all the things that are happening, and I think only the SEC and the Big Ten schools are going to be able to fully compensate athletes to the highest level, just because of the amount of television money that's going to flow through those two leagues, it seems, going forward, to the detriment of the Big 12 and the ACC, whoever's left in those two leagues, and certainly the group of five. So that's kind of the starting point, is that there's going to be new haves and fewer haves and more have-nots. And the have-nots that are currently there are going to be even more have-naughty. And then in terms of inducements and all that, I guess I look at it and I say, currently it's like the schools are allowed to tell you what guys made this year, I guess, but can't promise you what guys would make next year. And the collectives supposedly aren't supposed to contact guys until they're enrolled in school, supposedly. But, who knows if there are third parties afoot in this whole thing. And I don't know. It's very messy. And the thing I come back to is that Tennessee is a voluntary member of the NCAA and agreed to abide by their regulations, although parties have brought legal matters into the courts to say that the regulations violate the antitrust provisions. So it's a total mess right now. And voluntarily being a member of an institution doesn't apparently means that Tennessee can pick and choose which of that institution's bylaws it wants to follow, depending on what it views as a potential antitrust violation. There's been no formal final finding by a court. This was just a temporary injunction. And so it's kind of real Wild West right now until this case is heard on its merits at whatever time that'll be. So that's my understanding of it, that we are in a kind of a real, even more in a state of limbo than we've ever been in terms of what's legal and what's not.
Yeah, and eventually this will all have to be collectively bargained for, with the players agreeing to whatever kind of cap or whatever, so that there can be guardrails, because as it is right now, any guardrail is going to be met with some sort of litigation, just because that's how we are now, and somebody's going to be
antitrust, yeah,
right, and so somebody's going to want to push that, and the NCAA has so many lawsuits going on right now that I don't know how they're going to. They're never going to be able to punish Michigan because they're too busy being punished themselves, and but it's a lot for them to deal with, and so that's why I think eventually Big Ten and the SEC are moving towards breaking away, and if they take some people with them and create their own rules, and there will be some collective bargaining. Now that eventually leads to the, what happens when the players strike? It's like, well, I guess you just go watch the group of five that year. that's all going to happen at some point, but that's many years down the road. But I was just reminded of talking about this pay for play and things like that. It was 11 years ago, almost to the month, when the whole Ed O'Bannon thing was coming down, and Jim Delaney wrote a letter saying, and I can quote it here. It has been my longstanding belief that the Big Ten schools would forego the revenues in circumstances and instead take steps to downsize the scope, breadth, and activity of their athletic programs. Several alternatives to pay-for-play model exist, such as the Division III model, where there are no scholarships offered and players pay to play there. So he was saying, like, back then, 11 years ago, the Big Ten would rather go to a Division III model than start paying players. And he believed the schools felt that same way also. But the TV money has gotten so good and so big that no schools are going to be like, you know what, let's go back to the D3 model. Not even Northwestern, which probably could, but now they've got their fancy new stadium that they're trying to build, but or they may have to go to D3 because they won't be able to build a new stadium. And right now the old stadium is being torn down. So they may just have to play somewhere else for a few years, but that's not that long ago that the leadership in the Big Ten was feeling that way. And I don't, it's been interesting. Also, I think social media has had a big part to play in the call for fairness for the players as well, but just because there's been so much money that you can't just have it stick with the schools, because there are too many people who have seen too many of these other instances where the rich just keep getting richer and nobody else does, and so they see an opportunity to speak out on the players' behalves, and now the players have the power as well.
Okay, a couple things that come to mind here. I'd love to get a response. Number one is, when all of this broke the summer of, I think, 21. Okay, my understanding was NIL was about name, image, and likeness. Mm-hmm. This was not a pay-for-play model. This was being able to benefit from exactly that name, image, and likeness. So this doesn't seem to be happening. This seems to be a pay-for-play model through the collectives anyway. Is it being just completely ignored, or is it being justified as when you throw your jersey on Saturday afternoon and run around the field, that's your name, image, and likeness display for a national TV audience? And so that's how we're getting away with that?
I think a lot of it is just the constant wink and nod that has been around college football for 50 years in terms of paying players. It's like, oh yeah, this is all about students and schooling, and the same thing now, where everybody sees coaches talk about how other coaches are poaching players, but they don't name names because, as I say, it's the college football omerta, it's the college coach omerta. They're all part of the mafia in terms of college coaching. And I remember asking Ryan Day last signing day, he was talking about, because Ohio State lost some guys because of NIL. They lost some 5-star defensive ends. And I said, you're talking about this, but if you're not going to name names, then why do you keep talking? He's like, well, it's just not a time. Now's not the time for it. It's like, it is, unless the reason coaches don't do it is because the reason coaches don't want to name other coaches is because somebody can name their name and something. So if you're all guilty, then, be quiet about it. But I will also say, Steve, what you're talking about earlier in terms of collectives can't contact high school kids. They can do whatever they want because we're not enticing anybody. We're just saying, hey, we like your name, image. We'd like to, be able to utilize your name, image, and likeness. And you see now, like Chris Henry Jr. transferring from Cincinnati Withrow out to California, because in California, high school kids can make NIL. I'm not saying that's why he did it, but that's why some people are going to be transferring to California, because you can make NIL in high school there, and you can't in Ohio. And nobody's stopping Tennessee's collective from saying, hey, we'd like Chris Henry Jr. to represent thing, but we're not beholden to Tennessee. We're a separate entity. And so it's just a whole bunch of winking and pretending, which, as I said, has been around college football for a long, long time, but it's just a different brand. I mean, in basketball as well, nobody is more crooked than John Wooden in terms of letting a right-hand man pay for championships, but he is still, the greatest of all time. That's bullcrap.
Yeah, you make a good point on the coaches. They don't want to be linked with turning anybody in because they don't want to be ostracized by the coaching community for being a snitch. And they want, whenever they need a job, to be able to still be employed somewhere and interview wherever they want and get a job. Perfect example of this is Bruce Pearl. He was an assistant at Iowa with Dr. Tom Davis a million years ago. And it was believed he turned in Illinois for Deion Thomas, again, late 80s basketball player, pretty good player, who supposedly received a Chevy Blazer to play at Illinois. And Bruce Pearl was believed to be the guy that turned him in, and he was unemployable for a decade until he resurfaced. It took a generation of coaches to go out of the game for him to get back into it. So, he paid the price for being the whistleblower, and he's the poster child for why I don't turn anybody in. So, it is what it is. And I don't know. I think we're all ready for whatever the new paradigm is. We're ready for it to take hold and ready for there to be some bleeping stability in this sport. I mean, they haven't even had the first 12-team playoff, and the dumbasses already want to make it 14. It's like, God, you're driving me up a wall here. And they did come up with the 5-7 format, which we debated, I think, last week a little bit when that came out. And, I guess for now, that's the best way to look at it, is they're going to have that kind of as the bedrock of how it's going to be structured. And so, it's going to be an interesting time. Hopefully within 5 years, we'll come out of this on the other side of it. So much the better.
And
Steve,
we'll get to the 14. Keep going, Tony.
Just real quick, Steve, how many people do you think, how many people in the coaching profession do you think were happy to see Bruce Pearl get busted with the Aaron Kraft cookout thing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because, again, this was a guy who, I don't know that he ever portrayed himself as holier than thou, but, he tried to do the right thing years ago, and he made a mistake, inadvertent as it may be, or whatever, the whole Aaron Kraft thing. And so, whatever it is, hey, in basketball and football recruiting, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. So there you go. That's my experience, 37 years at this. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
Okay, here's a bit of a model for you that's never going to fly, but I just like to throw it out there because I think most people watching are going to be okay with some semblance of thinking these players go to school, take classes, pass tests, they do all the things that a student does. Okay, they're making $1 million. Fine. But they are still, it just seems like we're headed toward a place where they just go to practice, throw on a jersey on Saturdays, and they are just an employee of the university as a football player.
Like Jefferson at Ridgemont High, they just fly them in for the games. So there you go.
Now, obviously, there is only a small percentage that can go to the NFL. And then there's a fairly large percentage that think they can go to the NFL, but they're fooling themselves, so they're going to approach it like that, and maybe this is going to come to the detriment of that level of player, because 5-10 years later they're going to take their check for $125,000 every year and waste it and never make the NFL and be screwed 5 years later. But we'll see what the casualties are of this type of model. But my thought is, you take away the NFL mandate that was worked out between college and the NFL, that a player has to be of a certain age to play in the NFL, or of course, having gone through 2 years of college football, and you take that away and you make it a completely free society. You can go at 17, 18 years old, try out for the NFL if that's what you want. But if you're going to sign up to play in college football, I won't call it the NCAA anymore, yes, you're going to earn this money. You're going to be paid a salary or whatever level of collective that you can get based on, what kind of deal you can strike in addition to that. But you're going to go to class because that's part of the deal of you being part of this university is you're going to go to class. You're going to have to, have a major that's legitimate and all those other things. And I know I'm a little bit in fairyland with this, but this would make me feel better about the sport going forward. I don't care how much people make. I think a lot of people are offended by the same people that wanted these players to be compensated a couple of years ago because they're generating all this money. Why don't they get paid? And now they see and hear the dollar figures and they're all offended by it. But the concept is the same. So we all tend to seem to get, or many, offended by people that make more money than us. Suddenly it's a bad thing because they're making so much money. But the concept is the same. So I have no issue with whatever they can make as long as the taxpayer's not, footing the bill. I'm good with it. If it's being created privately, they can make whatever they want. I just want to know that they are legitimate college students, and there's going to be an exception here and there, but that's fine. That there is an effort to keep that model in place.
Yeah, I think when you go to an NFL game, every player on the field makes more money than you do. When you go to a college football game, I don't think you really want to experience that. And I think that it's somewhat of a misguided notion, I suppose. I mean, why should you care what somebody else's worth is or their business or, whatever they're able to generate? I mean, certainly I was at the Iowa women's basketball game. And I guarantee you, Caitlin Clark makes more money this year than I do. So that, she's on a national State Farm commercial, for goodness sake. So, there's an example. But I don't know. It's, as we say, the commercialization of the whole thing, I think, is going to be a turnoff for some people. I think from top down and side to side, college athletics is going to have a day of reckoning. And, the days of Ohio State having 36 sports may be dwindling just because from a business standpoint, does it make sense to foot the bill for so many sports that, one, aren't televised, two, nobody attends, and three, don't bring any revenue, and four, athletics should be like the front door to the institution. A fencing match in front of 14 people isn't exactly a front door. And I use that just as an example. I mean, it's just something that they continue to promote because they always have. And that's just one example. I'm not saying that that's a frivolous program. I'm just saying that at some point, there's going to probably need to be some reassessment and realignment of those revenues, and to more in line with, again, these kids are putting on the show. They need to be compensated. And yet there was a case in Oregon already where some women's athletes are suing because their NIL doesn't begin to look like what their men's counterparts look like. So they're saying Title IX, and like, where does it end? I mean, what are the rules? I mean, what is allowable? And, can men make more than women in this footprint? I don't know.
Here's
by that right, every Big Ten basketball player should be suing because Caitlin Clark makes more money than them, right?
I do think it's interesting that we're getting to the point where college sports, football is making too much money, so we can no longer have fencing. We're going to have to get rid of baseball because there's too much money in football, and you've got to pay everybody. And college has always had athletics long before there was any money in it. And I don't know why you need to that should be part of the college experience. But as we know, like, the college experience is being devalued. That has nothing to do with sports. It's just the way things are now. But it feels like Ohio State is going to try their best to keep all 36. But I'm with you, Steve. Like, a new guy coming in, new president, new AD, they're going to look at it and be like, yeah, it was a nice time. It was a nice thought. This is a different time. This is a different era. but you still have to operate, within Title IX. And what do you cut? What men's sports do you cut? And then it becomes like, I didn't mean to take this much off, And so it's like, let's just let it grow out. Let's just let it, be what it is and manage and ask our donors for more money, and also jack up the tuition, which used to be a state law that you could only do it like 3% a year. And they got rid of that state law like 15 years ago. And now it's just like, yeah, let's go 8% this year.
God.
Yeah. So at many of these schools, football and then men's basketball, maybe women's basketball at certain schools, et cetera, depending on the strength of the sports at that particular school. But the basic model is football pays the bills for the other sports. Okay. Now, at what point do we get down the tier list that is no longer applicable, that football can take care of it? I'm sure in the MAC, football is not taking care of the rest of the sports. Who's taking care of the rest of the sports? The taxpayer, I assume. So if the taxpayer,
the general fund. Yep.
Yeah. So in a sense, if the taxpayer is paying the rest of the bill, I think people would then have a more difficult time once they see these athletes, and not especially the football players because they're making the revenue, but other athletes making money that in a sense could be connected back to tax revenue.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things that pour into that general fund, in terms of tuition and fees and everything else, in addition to federal money and state money that comes in to underwrite a lot of these universities.
Let's say these guys start making $100,000. Let's say that becomes the salary standard. And you talk about a mess trying to figure out what does Will Howard make and Quinshon Judkins versus, just a decent starting player versus the backups versus the special teams and the program players, et cetera. Yeah. Anyway, 85 scholarships. If they make $100,000 a year, that's an $8.5 million payroll. There are 70 teams in the Power Five. And if the SEC and the Big Ten get a hold of this and it becomes maybe 24 on 24 and it's only a 48 and they get rid of the Wake Forest of the world, then it'll be a different math problem. But you're looking at a $600 million payroll for college football. Do they make that much money net once they pay all the staffs and the travel and this and that? And is there that much surplus?
Some schools can do it, but some schools won't. I think Ohio State could do it tomorrow if they wanted. Out of a $275 million budget, you just tell, okay, women's lacrosse, instead of a $2 million budget, your budget's now $1.5 million, go. You bring in 26,000. So, going to have to make do with less is what it boils down to, I guess. Or you just start cutting line items and just saying, yep, that's gone. As I always like to say, does men's rowing need the 8th nutritionist? I don't know. Do they need that 9th nutritionist? I don't know. I suppose maybe they do. It's very strenuous rowing that boat. So
let's also not forget Ohio State's not supposed to make a profit. So
yeah, every dime that comes in goes back out. And really, that's not that difficult now when you're talking about having to build buildings and repair buildings. And I mean, that Woody Hayes Athletic Center, there is a construction crew on site at that building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, 365 days out of the year. Somebody is working on something to try and make that better. And there are a lot of people in and around the program. That building was opened in 1986. So it's 14 and 24. It's 38 years old. Some aspects of it are less than 5 years old. It's been gutted. It's been renovated. It's been added on to. It's been blah, blah, blah. They're like, hey, for us to be matching up with the new state-of-the-art facility at, I don't even know who's got the best and the brightest now, Clemson, Georgia, whoever. We need to tear this thing down and start over, is what people are saying. I'm like, GTFOH. It's like, come on. What do you really need? I mean, to me, it still seems like it's the state of the art. So, but maybe it's not. I don't know.
There are plans to expand because it is a huge footprint that they have. They can get rid of a couple of their practice fields, but that place is kind of like the Winchester Mansion. And if you don't know what that is, go ahead and Google it, and you'll see it's just the constant construction going on, and a lot. You wouldn't think it could keep expanding, but there's a lot of room over there, even though it continues to get smaller and smaller with all of the buildings going in over at that area. But they've got 5 full practice fields. You can get rid of a couple of those and put one of those on indoors, and you got to keep up with the Joneses. And I know there are plans, but I think the pandemic kind of slowed a lot of those plans down, or else this probably would already have it by now, honestly.
Steve, to your point, before Ohio State starts wiping out positions in sports, if they really want to play hardball, they go to the Big Ten and say everyone's making whatever the figure is, $85 million in TV revenue, and pull a Florida State and say, we're really worth, start breaking down the numbers and the eyeballs on the TV sets versus Northwestern and Indiana and whoever else. We're really pulling in, I don't know what that figure would be. Would it be 5 times that? It could be $450 million a year that Ohio State really makes in that TV contract for the Big Ten.
Yeah, paid for what they bring in, no doubt. I mean, I don't know. I keep hoping at some point that they would take some of the burden off, the rank and file Buckeye fan who spend uncomfortable amounts of money to support this team. And, I don't know. It's just, I just wish they'd make it a better experience for those people. I mean, it's gotten almost out of control for people, just normal people who want to support the team.
Well, that's the thing. It's not about, they don't care about normal people. It's, can you find 90,000 people that will pay this much, because that's better than 105,000 that would pay this much less.
Yeah.
And so that's where, and you're doing that knowing you're competing against a television product and the home theaters, which are better than they've ever been. So you've just got to decide, do we want more people or do we want to make the biggest bang for our buck? Now this year with Ohio State having 8 home games, they're gonna be swimming in it. But some days, some years it's going to be 6, and it's going to be a little bit tougher.
I can see that Steve was anxious to bring up the 14-team playoff because he really wants to talk about this. But no, I actually want to bring it up because I think when you look at it, once you get past the surface of, a 14-team playoff instead of 12, that we're letting in 2 other teams. But to me, it's not about that, even though Washington and Tennessee are going to make the playoff instead of not making the playoff, or fill in the blank of your marginal 9-3 teams in the big conferences that are going to make the playoff. It's more about maybe this SEC and Big Ten influence saying the Big 12 champion shouldn't get a bye like we do, and the ACC champ shouldn't get a bye. We'll get 2 byes, and that's going to be basically reserved for the Big Ten and the SEC champions. That's what it's about.
Wow. Yeah, I suppose that could be. I mean, it's very predatory the way the whole thing is going down, it seems like. And the SEC and the Big Ten feel like they're like 2 steps away from saying, okay, we're just going to take our ball and go play with ourselves. And the heck with you other people, you unwashed other people whose games no one watches on television. So that's why you're not aligned with us. But I don't know. On one hand, you say they're killing it. On the other hand, you're saying, hey, I'm all for it. Let's go to an NFL style playoff. And 14, man, that just I don't know. I've never thought the number 13 or 14 team was a legitimate national championship team in college football, but who knows? Maybe 8-4 is a good record. I don't know, 9-3, whatever. So, 8-4, but they had 3 quad 1 wins. So it's like, okay, all right, sure. But they were 5-3 in the SEC East. It's like, come on, what do you people want? So I don't know. I'm ambivalent about the whole thing. They're going to do whatever they want to do, and I don't know. I don't know who's driving this train. I really don't. It. You just shake your head every day. There's a new development. You shake your head, and you're just saying this is counter to anything that makes common sense. But no, let's give it a whirl.
Well, and it reminds me of when we talked with new OSU AD, incoming AD Ross Bjork, and he talked about the next few years, the tipping point of college sports. And when I asked him, "Are you looking forward to it?" he said, "I'm just looking forward to it being settled and having the answer and knowing where we can go and move from here." And so, yeah, the 14 team thing to me, I'm with you, Mark. This to me felt like you're rewarding the top two teams more. You're trying to make the regular season better by creating a serious reward for just two teams rather than a serious reward for four teams. So, like, I don't really see much of an issue with it. It just creates a couple more games and a couple more TV slots. So they probably view it as it's harmless. What's two more games, and plus it's going to make more money. So there's what's the harm? And it's very limited harm, of course. So there is that. I hadn't put the math together like you though, where it's like, well, the Big Ten and the SEC get the first two, and then you go from there. But with the teams that they have, like, it will be interesting also because whenever if like the Big 12 or the ACC, when they have like the number one team, the committee will be like, yeah, but you went through the ACC and the Big 12. You didn't go through the Big 10
The
or
real
the
gauntlet.
Exactly. Yeah. So 0 losses in the ACC is like 1 loss in the big, or whatever. And so, yeah, you can wash it away and justify whatever you want in order to get those two. But also the ACC and the Big 12, they just got to be happy to be invited. Just be happy that you're at the dance because that's the way things are right now. And better to be at the dance than at home on a Friday night watching wrestling.
Yeah. I assume I like it the way it is that theoretically all 4 of the Power 4 champions, 4 years out of 5 or 8 years out of 10, whatever, 9 years out of 10, they're going to get slotted 1, 2, 3, 4. I like that because it creates in that championship weekend, the first weekend in December, some real urgency. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just can't sleepwalk through that game just because you're Georgia and you're a 17-point favorite. You just can't show up and assume. You have to actually go out and win the game to get that bye, to get that spot. And so I kind of like it the way it is because it creates 4 must-watch, must-win games over that weekend. I don't know how it's set up this coming year. I think it's still premature to say how it's going to be slotted, but I would have to think that one of those Power 4s is going to get moved to Friday night, which has always been the Pac-12 night. And that way it won't be SEC and it won't be Big Ten. So I would assume Big 12 or ACC are going to have to move to Friday night because you would not, as a programmer, want one of those 2 games up against another play-in game of that caliber. I think ACC or Big 12 are going to be coaxed to move their game. Maybe they rotate it, and one of them always moves to Friday night, and the other one's at noon on Saturday, and then you build up to SEC and then Big 10 at night. That's what makes sense to me is you'd stack it so you have 4 different TV slots for those play-in games. I call them play-in games, but
no, I do prefer the idea of automatic qualifiers being the conference champs. If you get 4, then 4 buys is just but again, you're talking about you might give a 9-4 Wake Forest a buy over an 11-1 Ohio State or an 11-1 Michigan. So you're going to have some uproar there. And the Big Ten and the SEC aren't going to wield their power just for some automatic qualifiers. They're doing it so that they can have more power on putting their own product in there. But yeah, even if you have fewer automatic qualifiers, or there isn't a play in terms of the conference championship game, if you do win your conference and you're 10-3 or whatever, you're going to make the playoffs. So, just looking at last year's rankings, the first 4-loss team after conference championship weekend was number 19, Oregon State. Everybody else is 0, 1, 2, or 3 losses. And there are going to be 3 teams with 3 losses in the 12-team playoff at points as well. So, I don't think this dilutes it too much. It just gives the 3 and 4 seed somebody to beat in the first round.
Well, Steve's thinking like a television programmer. I guess based on my background, I should be thinking that direction, but he's being more practical. And that's the real reason. I was thinking more from the standpoint of I like the 4 qualifiers being the 4 conference champions, because I think there's a positive tension between the bucket of you earn it, you deserve it, you play in a conference versus this, we just select the best. I don't care who they are. This subjective, we just take them. We're going to take all these SEC and Big Ten teams. And it provides tension that you have components of both. You've got a committee that's going to fill out all these at-large spots that's going to be loaded with SEC and Big Ten teams, but you're honoring the conference championships. So that's a positive tension to me between the two concepts and the two approaches. Although, again, I think Steve nailed it with the practical aspect of it for the television audiences and why it's going to work better that way.
It's all a television show, as we've come back to a lot of times.
I'll give 1 year, for example, because I'm going to run this 14-team playoff over the course of what we would have seen from 2014 on, because we've got college football playoff rankings during that time. And I'm just throwing out 1 year. Really, every year is a log jam of decisions that have to be made. And again, I think the 3 of us agree these teams aren't going to play for a national champion. They're not going to be involved 3 weekends later playing for a national championship. But just take 2023 for an example. Yes, they're going to be 9-3 teams qualify for the playoff. There's only going to be 1 based on the college football playoff rankings, and that would be LSU at 13. But Louisville, Iowa, 10-3 out. Arizona, Notre Dame, somebody else that I can't decipher here, North Carolina State, 9-3 out. Every year you're going to have like 4, 5, 6 teams at 9-3, and only like 1, 2 maybe at the most can make it. And what I also think is an interesting component is if you go year to year, that 10-2 team that loses a conference championship game, almost 80% of the time, basically, they drop from being inside the 12 to outside the 12. And what is the committee how are they going to view that and approach that when it means something?
Well, there's that danger, but it's also an opportunity for somebody. So we've seen examples with the 14 playoff of the conference championship hurting you and helping you. So I won't get hung up on that, but it is, if you are a team with 2 losses, like it's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna make James Franklin super upset if he's at 10-2 and they missed the Big Ten championship game because there are 2 teams ahead of them. That just means 2 losses, we're in. 3 losses, we might not be. So we're good at 2. We're gonna, you know what? We've been dealt a 16. We're gonna stick.
And then the other tip off to this, when I said off the top that the first thing that my mind went to was this isn't about numbers 13 and 14. This is about creating Big Ten and SEC buys exclusively, was what Tony Petiti said last week to ESPN. That seemed to be the tip off to me. Was he made 2 statements. He said, number 1, we want more teams in the playoffs in the Big Ten. We want to position ourselves to have more teams in the playoffs. And then bingo, a couple days later, it's reported that the SEC and the Big Ten are pushing for 4 automatic spots. And then the other component, he says, is that, we want more meaningful games in November. Well, the first thing I thought of was you're stating you want more teams in the playoffs, but you want more meaningful games in November, which means more good teams are playing each other in November. Those are going to be counterproductive based on the way teams are selected now. So then it made sense that a couple days later, oh yeah, 4 automatic qualifiers out of the Big Ten. That's what you're pushing for. That's going to ensure that these games in November, when we've got USC playing Penn State, Ohio State's playing Oregon, and all these games, aren't going to hurt us because we've protected 4 spots. So we get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Big Ten, right? The Big Ten standings the last couple of years. The number 4 team in the Big Ten this year would have been like Iowa. The number 4 Big Ten team in 2022 was Purdue. So you've got a Purdue after the Big Ten championship game with a record of 8-5, I believe, something like that, making the playoffs as one of those 4 automatic Big Ten. And it now, granted, you are adding 4 new programs, so the talent is going to be higher, but so maybe it works out. But at 14 with 8 spots taken up by the Big Ten and SEC, is it terrible? I mean, is 6 enough for the Big 12 and the ACC and a group of 5? I mean, it's 3, 2, and 1 for those guys. Is that shortchanging them a little bit? Maybe not. I don't know, because and what are they going to want when the ACC breaks down and Florida State is in the Big Ten and Notre Dame is in the Big Ten, and we just continue to grow and grow and grow. But I don't know. Is 4-4 for the Big Ten and the SEC, is that too much of a spot grab there, Steve?
Man, that is a tough one. Because some years you could justify it, and as you mentioned with the Purdue year, you can't. I mean, they're not one of the top 15 or 20 teams in the country. They just happen to be in a setup that, I mean, there were 2 better Big Ten teams that didn't get to play in the championship game because of some archaic geographic setup. SEC still has it, as far as I know. I don't know if they're going to one division in the top 2. I honestly haven't researched that, but which would make sense. That would bring them into alignment with all the other leagues now that are doing it that way. But so yeah, I'm again, Ohio State's well positioned for them to be in it most every year, and whatever else happens after that, I'm whatever on the whole thing. I want to see a few years and see in practice what it looks like before I say, oh, this isn't right or this is good or whatever.
I'm just looking at the last 2 years, including looking at the final rankings. So these aren't totally accurate, but the final rankings of all of the teams that will be in the Big Ten in the next year. And so last year, the number 12 team, which was Penn State, would not have made the playoffs if you're talking 4 automatic qualifiers because of the Oregon and the Washington situation, and Michigan and Ohio State being the top 4 Big Ten teams.
Yeah.
And also the year before that, I think USC would have missed it as the number 12 team as well, because there are 4 Big Ten teams ahead of them in Washington, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. So maybe there's something to that.
But that's with the bowl game loss.
Right? Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. These are the final rankings. So I'd have to go back and just, I could actually do it right now and just look at the Week 15 rankings.
They would have been there. Penn State was safely in, and so was USC. USC was 11-1 before. Well, the conference.
Here's after the conference championships in 2022. You have Michigan, you have Ohio State, you have USC as the 3rd Big Ten team, and then Penn State would have been the 4th. Washington at 12 would have been left out in 2022. And then last year after the conference championship game, it would have been Michigan, Washington, Ohio State, and Oregon, the top 8, and Penn State at 10 would have been left out in this scenario. Leaving out the number 10 team seems pretty extreme.
How does Penn State get left out if there's only one group of 5?
Well, if we're talking, well, they may not. If you're going to have 5, like, are we? when they say at least 4 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten, or can they expand it to like 5 could be like
5 would be an at large. Yeah.
right. So like I'm just saying.
I got you. You're saying that 4 and no more, 4 guaranteed, but no
Right.
more. Okay.
Right. So
I'm thinking of it at least 4.
okay.
Yeah.
That's a good quality. We've got to decide on that. But yeah, I could see why as I look at it, 4 doesn't seem to be outrageous, especially when you're just coming off of a year where after the conference championship game, 4 of the top 8 are your future schools or present schools, and 5 of the top 10 are your future or present schools.
I think it's more likely they're going to cannibalize each other. I mean, when you really get right down to it, I mean, each of these teams is going to play 9 conference games this coming year, and somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. So a very good team's going to be 6-3 in the conference, 9-3 at best. I mean, I don't know. It's not looking like, to me, it's a numbers situation. When you look at Michigan's schedule this year, whatever their over under is of like 9.5. I mean, you look at the players they have coming back, the coaching staff, and that schedule. There's no way they win 10 games. I can't imagine it. So for us to sit here and project that there's going to be, a 13-0 Big Ten team, a 12-1 Big Ten team, an 11-1 Big Ten team, and a 10-2 Big Ten team, and then maybe another 10-2 or a 9-3. I don't think that's realistic. Somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, and upsets and whatever. I mean, in these mega conferences, 8-4 is going to be a great record. It really will be. 9-3 is going to be a phenomenal record in these mega conferences where the best of the best are playing each other on a more regular basis than anything we've ever seen in the past. I think, especially when you go out of conference like Michigan is and playing Texas, this year, I mean, they have no chance to win that game, in my opinion. Even though it's at Michigan, they have no chance. So I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to whether that next level of Wisconsin, Iowa, and those teams are good enough to pull off some upsets on a fairly regular basis to keep those records down. But and I don't want to blow 2023 out of proportion because I do think it was a bit of an outlier. But even if those teams from the West Coast were playing in the Big Ten, look at Penn State. Okay, you would think at 10-2, you tack on another tough game onto their schedule. They may lose that game and they get knocked out of the playoff. However, the way they're approaching it, it appears though they're trading in Ohio State or Michigan for somebody else. So maybe they just trade losses and they're still 10-2 and they're still in. You can tack another loss on Ohio State. You can tack another loss on Michigan, Washington, Oregon. They're still all making the playoff.
As they should.
Could be.
But again, I say that season might have been a little bit of an outlier because Michigan, Washington, undefeated teams. That doesn't happen very often.
I also think last year was not a great year overall in terms of talent and great teams. I don't know. Like I've said before, like you take any of the 2019 Ohio State, LSU, or Clemson teams, and they're running through the playoffs this past year.
Yeah.
I would think so. Sue, we appreciate you being here. Sue's got a question about the incoming transfers. I believe that you guys got a chance to talk to all of them except for Julian Sayin. Did it appear as though they are getting acclimated? They've come a long way. They like the area. They like what they've seen thus far.
Aside from the snow, back when we talked to him, no. From everything I've heard, everything is going well, and this is where Mickey Marotti, he has control of the team essentially right now through workouts, and this is where the new players integrate and ingratiate themselves to their teammates, because they see the work that is being put in. Everybody respects all of the work that everybody's doing. They see who's working and who's not, and that's how you build the respect of your teammates through those workouts. And so everything I've heard has been fine. I know there's the I don't even want to talk about it, the stupid rumor that somebody started about Caleb Downs wanting to transfer to Michigan, which is just started by some Michigan troll, and you just if you I would encourage people just to look at people who are tweeting stuff and look at their bio and seriously look at it and just try not just I don't want to say assume most of everything you see on Twitter is a lie because that's not true. Just feel free to double check on a lot of this stuff because if it seems odd, pretty good chance it is.
That's why I tell people from time to time that want me to be more of a breaking news outlet. Nope, that's not going to be. First of all, it's a losing game, losing proposition. I don't have enough contacts. Number two, no, don't need to be wrong on things. Don't want to jump to conclusions and report things just to be the first. Not going to do that. All right, Tony, what's going on this week?
I have started my positional spring previews. Did the offensive line yesterday, doing I think defensive ends today. Dropped a notebook from today as well about just stuff going on, people talking. So you can find that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And we will be wrapping up our Buckeye Weekly. Will be wrapping up our spring positional previews tomorrow with I think the defensive line, and then on Thursday I believe is our 1000th episode. So we'll be doing a live show for that. So look for that.
Guess they rack up pretty often when you do them every day. Wow, 1,000. We've been here for a long time. We're at 256. 1,000 shows for Tony. Show up for that, folks. Steve, what's going on this week?
Well, headed to the Combine, and we'll be filing reports from over there beginning tomorrow with all the interviews that all the Ohio State guys are doing. So looking forward to that, and also tracking both men's and women's basketball. Huge day, obviously, on Sunday. The women clinched the Big Ten. The men upset Michigan State. Span of 8 days, Jake Diebler beat a pair of Hall of Fame coaches with Matt Painter from Purdue and Tom Izzo from Michigan State. So I'd say that's a pretty, on the 9th day, he rested apparently. So yeah, it's been a good run here for them. And, as I was pounding the table, they're not dead yet. The patient does have a pulse. So we'll see if they can carry it over Thursday against Nebraska, women Wednesday against Michigan, going for outright championship at this point.
Tony reminded us on Twitter that Randy Ayers' 1990 team made it at 16-12. I do remember that because I went to class at Kent State the next day.
Yep.
And my coaching football guy who was on the Kent State football was all up in arms because Kent State made it to the conference championship game and they were 22-8 or whatever the record was. And Ohio State's making it. They're 16-12. Look at the schedule.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, real quick, if Ohio State, because I had somebody ask me, can Ohio State make the tournament? And I look, if they win out and make it to the Big Ten tournament championship game, they'll be 23-12.
Yeah.
And they'll have some really good wins along the way. So
yeah, I think that, obviously if they go in, I think if they win these next 3 games, they could position themselves outside the bottom 4, where they would only have to win 4 games in 4 days, which last year they won 3 games and then lost in the semifinals to Purdue. The idea that anybody would win 4 games in 4 days to go to the NCAA tournament is just, it happens like once a decade. It's so outrageous, but for them to have pulled off what they've already pulled off just in the last 8 days has been nothing short of remarkable. So anything's possible. As far as at large, they didn't get much of a bump in the net. They moved up to 60 after they beat Purdue, back down to 66 after they lost to Minnesota, and they're like 65 or 66 today still after beating Michigan State. The problem is they're now up to like 28 data points in that formula to where one game isn't going to give you that bump as maybe a December or January game would. So you kind of are what your numbers say you are at this point, which is on the outside looking in. All you can do is win games. I think if they can win these 3 and maybe go 2-1 in the conference tournament, get to the semis or whatever Friday, maybe, but too many games they pissed away early on. Indiana, Penn State, Iowa, just too many games that Michigan, for God's sake. I mean, God, Michigan's the worst Big Ten team I can recall in years. So, yeah, there's 3 or 4 right there that they should have back.
All right, guys, thanks for being here and adjusting your schedules. Everyone else, we've got USC live tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern time, so be over on the USC channel. Again, Tony, thank you. Steve, have a great trip to the Combine, and we will see you next week.
All right, guys, take care.